In this video, we will cover Excel formatting, Lecture 3, Conditional Formatting. Conditional formatting is used to apply formatting to cells based on some pre-specified rule. It allows you to control how the formatting is applied and has many applications. There are 3 steps to apply conditional formatting. Step 1. Highlight the cells that you want to apply conditional formatting to. Step 2. On the Home tab in the Style section, select Conditional Formatting. For Step 3, there are a number of different options that you can select, including Highlight Cells rules, Top-Bottom rules, data bars, color scales, and more. The Highlight Cells rules contains various logical rules. The greater than rule will highlight any cells that contain a value that is larger or greater than some specified value, either a value that you enter into the dialog box directly or a value contained in a cell in the workbook. The less than rule will highlight any cells that contain a value that is less than some specified value, again either a value that you enter into the dialog box directly or a value contained in a cell in the workbook. The between rule highlights any cells that contain a value that lies in between two specified values. The equal to rule highlights any cell that is equal to a specified value. The text that contains option, or rule, will highlight any cells that contain a specified string of text. The option a date occurring will highlight any cells that contain a date that occurs in one of the selectable options, which include yesterday, today, tomorrow, in the last 7 days, last week, this week, next week, last month, this month, or next month. Duplicate values will highlight any cells that are either a duplicate or unique. There are also more rules which include greater than or equal, less than or equal, not between, which highlights any cells that are not between two specified values, not equal to, not containing, which highlights any cells that do not contain a specified string of text, beginning with or ending with, which highlight a cell if it begins or ends with some specified string or value, as well as some others including blanks, which highlights any blank cells, no blanks, which highlights any cells that are not blank, errors and no errors, which highlight either any cells that contain an error or any cells that do not contain an error. The top-bottom rules highlight cells based on mathematical ranks or rules. The top 10 items and bottom 10 items highlight either the top or bottom 10 items in the selected data. The top 10% and bottom 10% highlight the top or bottom 10% of items in the selected data. For example, if there are 20 items, it will highlight the top 2 or bottom 2 items. If 10% of the number of selected items is not a whole number and contains decimal places, it will round the number of items down to the nearest integer. There is an exception to this if the number of items to highlight is less than 1. Here it will round the number of items up to 1. The above average or below average will highlight any items that are either above the average or below the average. There are also more rules to choose from. You can choose a rule that utilizes a different number than 10 for the top 10 or bottom 10, such as 12, 20, 30, or so on, or a different percentage than 10% for the top 10% and bottom 10%. You can specify a rule that is above or equal to the average, or below or equal to the average. There are also rules that involve the standard deviation of the data. For example, you could have a rule that is 1 standard deviation above the average, or 1 standard deviation below the average. Other options for conditional formatting include the data bars, color scales, and icon sets rules. The data bars creates a horizontal highlight. The higher the value, the longer the horizontal highlight. You can also change the color or the format by clicking More Rules. The color scales applies a color scale to the selected cells. This is useful for creating heat maps which have red formatting for bad cells, yellow for OK cells, and green for good cells. You can specify the color pattern from a selection of 6 patterns. You can also select more rules to define a new custom rule or pattern. The icon sets allows you to specify a rule that assigns an icon to the cell's value based on a defined rule. This is a neat rule, however, I have yet to use it in practice. Finally, we have the New Rule, Clear Rules, and Manage Rules options. The New Rule option opens the New Formatting Rule window. Here you can create a new rule based on your desired criteria. The Clear Rules option allows you to delete or clear the conditional formatting from either the selected cells, the selected worksheet, a table, or a pivot table. The Manage Rules option displays all rules where you can then edit or manage each one. Now we will cover an example to illustrate these concepts. In this example, we'll illustrate how to use the conditional formatting tools. In column A, suppose we have the sales reps. In column B, we have the sales, and we want to apply conditional formatting to these sales. So what we'll do is we'll first highlight our cells. So we'll highlight all of the sales values. And the first thing we'll do is we'll highlight any sales that are greater than, say, 1500. And we'll make those green, so you can select whatever color you want. So here we have highlighted any cells that contain a value that are greater than 1500. If we don't want that rule anymore, we can go Clear Rules, Clear from Selected Cells, and now it's cleared the rules from those selected cells. We can also have one that says a rule that's in between. So we want to highlight any people that have sales between 1000 and 2000. And we'll highlight those with yellow. So again, what it's done is highlighted any cells that have a value in between 1000 and 2000. To clear the rules, again, we'll just clear the rules by going Clear Rules from Selected Cells. Another thing that we might be interested in is looking at any cells that have a value less than some value. So let's say we're looking at any sales reps that have sales less than 500. So now we can highlight any of the sales reps that have poor sales. Again, we can clear rules this way, or alternatively, we can hit Manage Rules, which brings up all the rules that we have in the data set. And we can select the rule that we want to get rid of and hit Delete Rule, and now it's gone. Moving on, we'll cover the top-bottom rules. So suppose we want to highlight the top 10 items in the selection here with green. So now we've highlighted the top 10 people. Now suppose further we want to highlight the top bottom, but this time in red. So now we've highlighted the top 10 items and top bottom items, and we can quickly identify using color which are our best performers and which are our poorest performers. So again, we'll just clear the rules. The other thing we can do is we can highlight the top 10%. We'll fill those with green. So here you can see we have 48 items. So the top 10% of 48 would be 4.8. Excel will then round that down to 4. So we should see 4 items in this list that are highlighted green. Here's the first one, second, third, fourth, and then there's no more. So you can see how it would work. The other thing we can do is we can also highlight the bottom 10% in red. So again, this just allows you to identify with color your top performing and poor performing sales reps. So we can clear those rules. So the next thing we'll do is look at data bars. So the other thing we can do is we can use these data bars, and you can see the preview on the left. So greater values have a higher horizontal format. So the greater the value, the higher the horizontal format. Color scales allow you to specify a green, yellow, or red, or a combination in between, depending on the value. So this one will highlight a cell that has a higher value on average as green and a lower value as red, and in between it'll be fading between yellow and green and red and yellow. You can also select different formats from any of these different selections. The next we have icon sets, and like I said, I've never really used these in practice. But basically what it does is it puts an icon next to your values based on its value. So you can have traffic lights, you can have check marks, you can have different symbols. Again, I don't know if there's much practical use for this. Finally, if we put a rule on it to begin with, what we can do is we can go into Manage Rules, and now we can actually delete these rules as before, or we can actually edit them. So we can edit this and we can say, okay, highlight the top 25 items and go okay, and now it's highlighted the top 25 items instead of the top 10. Another thing we can do in manage rules is we can edit them and we can actually change the rule right in this box. So we can say, okay, contains, we can do a top 25% instead and apply. And as usual in here, you can also delete the rule if you want. Another thing you can do is you can create a new rule. So here you can play around with any sort of rule that you want. So you can use a formula, you can use values above or below an average, and in here you can select any values above, below, equal or above, or even use the standard deviation. So let's hit this and it'll highlight any value that's above one standard deviation from the average. So there we go. Now, to manage the rules, here we have two rules. So now we might want to delete this rule and keep this one here. Hit apply. So now we've deleted that one rule. So again, there's many rules that you can specify in the new rule here, and you can get really creative when you're highlighting any of the tools that you want.